All right, welcome Rabotai to another session of our Wednesday night shiur. Le'il nishmat tzipor son levat leah, roch Hashem techa began Eden, hi v'chol benot Yisrael shechot ima, b'chal yachal yiselichot v'chein yitzvah nomar amen. May this shiur also be la'atzlachat the rabbi. He's not feeling well and he's going through a tough time. So may Hashem bless him with hatzlacha, may Hashem be mevatel all the gezerot ra'ot, and may he have only gezerot tovot, and b'schut the Chag of Chanukah, which is going to be Motzei Shabbat Be'ezrat Hashem, may there be great
Saturday
miracles.
night, right?
Yes,
First
Saturday night is the first candle.
First night.
Yes. So tonight we're going to have a very interesting shiur, the origins of Islam. Why did we pick this shiur? Because, as the Prophet Daniel wrote in his Sefer, in the Ketuvim, even though we are technically speaking in the Galut, in the exile of Edom, which is known as the Galut of Esav and his children, but technically speaking, the last couple of years before Mashiach comes, the rabbis tell us, the Chachamim, especially Rav Chaim Vital in his book Etz Hadat Tov, we're going to fall in the Galut of Yishmael, the last exile. Why is Galut Yishmael very important? Galut Yishmael, the exile of Ishmael, which we're standing right now on the cusps of the coming of Mashiach, and this is the greatest battle we will ever battle. In all the exiles of the world, none of them have ever experienced what we're experiencing right now, where one nation could bring the world to its knees. Literally speaking, the world. And especially, every other day you hear there's another terrorist attack. Just this past week, there was a terrorist attack in Berlin.
They just killed a Russian ambassador.
They just killed a Russian ambassador in Turkey, correct? Yeah. Just like that, a guy gets up, just shoots him in the name of Syria, this, that. And because of that, it's very important to know, history is the greatest weapon for the Jewish people. Because through Jewish history, being our eyes, you will know the truth of what happened, what will happen, because history repeats itself. And to understand what is Yishmael or Islam, we have to start from the beginning. In the beginning. Avraham Avinu is known as the father of the three main religions in this world. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But all three of them are called the Abrahamic religions. But the truth is, Islam, his father, their great-grandfather, their ancestor, Yishmael, was actually an Egyptian, the son of Ham. Why? We have a halacha in the Gemara, Masechet Kiddushin. What does the halacha state? The halacha says, if a Jewish man marries a non-Jewish woman, or a servant, a maidservant, even if he has 20 children from her, the Gemara in Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Samech Tet, Daf Samech Hey, I believe, says, the children are not called after him. The children are considered after the mother. They don't take his name, they don't take the father's name. Therefore, Avraham's maidservant was Hagar, and he had a child from her, Yishmael. Now, Hagar was an Egyptian princess. She was the daughter of Pharaoh. When Pharaoh saw what kind of miracles was happening to Sarah and Abraham, he told Hagar, his daughter, you rather be a servant in the house of Abraham than be a princess in the house of Pharaoh. And she went with him to be his shifcha. So, Yishmael, technically speaking, according to the Torah, according to Avraham Avinu, which kept the Torah, he was an Egyptian. And we know when Avraham sent Yishmael out of his house, like it's written in the Torah, Parashat Vayera, when he threw Yishmael out, where did he go? To Egypt. And he had a wife from where? V'tikach lo isha me'eretz Mitzrayim. So it's very interesting. Yishmael is known to be really Egyptian. The first exile that the Jewish people were in, even though they weren't really a nation yet, was what? Egypt. 210 years we were in Egypt. And the last exile that we'll be in is known as Islam. But Islam is really not an Abrahamic religion. It's really a what? An Egyptian religion. It's an Egyptian nation. On this, the Shlomo HaMelech says, Ma shehayahu sheyeh. We started off battling the Egyptians, and we're going to end out battling the Egyptians. The fight with Egypt never ended. That's why, Rabotai, you will know, we have a mitzvah from the Torah every day to remember what? Zecher Litziat Mitzrayim. Rabotai, why do I have to remember Egypt so many times? I say Shema Yisrael, Yitziat Mitzrayim. Kiddush, Yitziat Mitzrayim. Tfilin, Yitziat Mitzrayim. Mezuzah, Yitziat Mitzrayim. Brit Milah, everything over there, Yitziat Mitzrayim. Yitziat Mitzrayim. How about Yitziat Bavel? How about Yitziat Paras Umardai? How about Yitziat Yavan? How about Edom? Why am I still saying Egypt? Because we never left the Galut of Egypt. The last fight that we're going to have before the coming of Mashiach will be with Egypt. Because Yishmael is really an Egyptian. He's not the son of Avraham, he's the son of Hagar. He's the grandson of Paro. At the end of the parasha of Toldot, I believe, it brings over there that Yishmael had 12 sons. 12 nomadic tribes. Bedouins. Why did he have 12 tribes? The Mefarshim say, just like Yaakov Avinu had 12 sons, so too Yishmael had 12 sons. 12 tribes versus 12 tribes. The Muslims were known throughout the world as the sons of Ishmael. Bnei Ishmael, they were not known as Muslims until Muhammad came to the scene. Now, to understand the scope of what is the era that we're talking about over here, when did Islam sprout? When did it become a nation, a religion, really? The year was about 600 CE. 600 Common Era. It's a very long time, about 600 years after the start of Christianity. That means they were the last religion to sprout. If we were 4,000 years ago, Christianity was about 1,500. Islam was, it's considerably new out of all the three main religions. They were all pagans. Every single Bnei Ishmael, sons of Ishmael, were pagans. All of them lived in the Arabian Peninsula. Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Morocco. This whole desert space. That's where they had their tribes, that's where they had their Bedouins, their nomads, their Avodah Zarah, their paganism. In the year 600 CE was a very, very crucial time for the Jewish people. Why? We were writing the Gemara at that time. The Gemara was being formed at that time. It was right after the collapse of the Roman Empire, after they were sacked by the Visigoths, the Vandals. The world fell into big destruction because there was a big fight between the two great empires, the Persian Empire and the Byzantium Empire. Who's going to take control of the known world? The Byzantium Empire, which was where Eretz Israel was falling under, was very, very deeply Christian. They basically destroyed every last yeshiva in Eretz Israel. They totally rooted them out. There was no Jews back then. Maybe one mishpacha, the Ramban, which is about 500 years after, he says when he got to Jerusalem, he only found 6 Jewish men over there. 6! He couldn't find a minyan even. So Israel became a desolate land because of the Byzantiums. On the other hand, you had the Persian Empire. Persian Empire was a mighty empire. It ruled over Iraq, Iran, what is known today as Iraq and Iran. That time, the Gemara was being formed in Bavel, in Iraq. One of the most crucial times in Jewish history because we are known as the people of the book. Who called us that? Actually, the Islam called us that. They called us the people of the book. What book are they talking about? The 5 books of Moses? No. They're talking about the Talmud. The Talmud has always been at the forefront of the fight against Jews. Always. It's always been the root of the great jealousy against the Jewish people. Because the Talmud, believe it or not, just as it was important back then, it's also important today. Any new halakha that comes along the way, if you don't have a root for that halakha in the Gemara, you can't pass kana halakha. There is no new decrees after the closing of the Gemara. The Jewish people under the Persian Empire in Iraq, they were very free to do a lot of this stuff, even though they were also persecuted, but it wasn't as bad as Rome, as Europe. So the Amoraim in Bavel had a chance to grow in the Torah. That's why we have two Talmuds. One is the Jerusalem Talmud, and one is the Babylonian Talmud. But for Halakha, we always follow the Babylonian Talmud. Why? They had the Harvachat Hadat. They had the ability to learn in peace. But somewhere during 600 CE, a group of Persian emperors came to the scene. They were called the Sassanid regime. The Sassanid kings were the complete opposite of the previous Persian dynasty. The Sassanids were fire worshippers. Their god was fire. That's who they worshipped. Now, because they worshipped fire, they hated the Jews. Why? Because the Jews can't turn what on Shabbat? Fire. What do the Jews put on Shabbat? 2 Shabbat candles. Chanukah is 8. It was like a spit in the face of the Sassanid regime. It got so bad that the emperor of the Persians, back then, of the Sassanid regime, he decided to totally kill every living being, every living family member of King David's family. Now, how do we know that they lived in that time? The Reish Galuta, which was basically the president of the Jews. Back then, the Jews were able to have a president of the whole Jewish population. It was called the Reish Galuta, the head of the exile, or the exilarch. The Reish Galuta had so much power, he could kill and send to jail, confiscate a person's money, put in cherem. He had complete power. He was a direct descendant of David HaMelech. Direct descendant. So this king, Persian king, decided that he's going to totally wipe out every living member of King David's family. Every single one. And to do that, he had to gather them all together in one place. And that's exactly what he did. He sent out a tzav, a command, to every known police officer, every Persian soldier, to kill every known family of the exilarch. Now, this was a big problem for the Jewish people, obviously, because if no Reish Galuta family, no Mashiach. If no Mashiach, then what are we doing here? We're all here for Mashiach, no? That's the end game. Or at least the step before the end game. Because really, Tchat HaMetim is supposed to be the end game. Right? Mashiach is basically the corridor into Tchat HaMetim, the resurrection of the dead. Because when Mashiach comes, guys, don't think, like some people think, when Mashiach comes, nobody's going to work no more. We're all going to go to Israel. We're all going to have fun. We're all going to enjoy our lives. There's going to be money all over the place. Gold, diamonds, everything's going to be great. The Rambam, in Hilchot Melachim, the last chapter over there, writes, Halakha is like Shmuel. What did Shmuel say in the Gemara? There is no difference between our times and Mashiach's time. Ela sheyibud melchoyot bilvad. The only difference is the Jewish people won't be persecuted anymore. That's the difference. We're going to have a king, a Beit HaMikdash. Yes, the 10 tribes must come back. True, they're lost. They've been lost for more than 2,000 years. They didn't come back in the second Beit HaMikdash. But life stays the same. We're going to have mitzvot. There's going to be averot. We're going to have yetzer hara. There's going to be... Of course there's going to be yetzer hara. I'll prove it to you. What's the point of a Beit HaMikdash? To bring sacrifices. What's the main sacrifice we bring? Korban Chatat. What's a Korban Chatat? A sin offering. If there's no yetzer hara, what sins are we going to do? Rather, what do you mean there's going to be no yetzer hara? The yetzer hara we're going to have at that time of history is going to be like our yetzer tov right now. And we're going to have an even greater yetzer tov. Understand? But if there's no sins in that time, then what's the point of having a Beit HaMikdash? What's the point of Yom Kippur? What's the point of all these things? Obviously there's going to be averot back then, but b'shogeg. B'shogeg means by mistake. Or ba'onest, by accident.
Is there a machloket that there were going to be korban on that at the end?
Yes, but the Ariya Kadosh and Rabbi Yehuda Abtai brings down Beit Lechem Yehuda and Shara Tikkun and many other places, Shara Miut HaYareach, Paskins, and we know there's no greater mind than the Ariya Kadosh, Paskins, that there's going to be korbanot and everything. And what's the proof? From Masechet Shabbat. What's the proof from Masechet Shabbat? Rabbi Ishmael, Kohen Gadol, once he was learning Torah by a candle. Now we know the halacha is, if you're learning Torah by a candle, it's asur. Why? Because you might take the light might diminish. You might tip the oil to make the fire burn higher. You do Chilul Shabbat. Once by mistake he did that. He said, I'm smart. I don't fall under the Gezerah. So what did he do? He was learning Torah by the candle. And by mistake he didn't realize it was Shabbat, and he tipped the candle and to the oil, and he burnt on Shabbat. By mistake, it was b'shogeg. He opened up his notebook, his Cheshbon HaNefesh, and he wrote, I am Ishmael. When Mashiach is going to come, I'm going to bring a very fat sin offering. Rabbi Ishmael says that himself. You're going to say there's going to be no korbanot time of Mashiach? Obviously there's going to be. Or else why would he write it? Continuing with the origins. Go ahead.
Is there going to be a lifespan?
Of course, it's going to be a lifespan. The Navi says, "Va'anar ben mea yamot." A child will be considered at the age of 100. The age of 100 will be like a child still. Understand? Anar ben mea yamot. Time of Mashiach.
So what's going to be the lifespan?
A lot. Understand? We don't know. We don't know yet exactly what's going to happen. We don't really know what's going to happen. You understand? But we have an idea. We have an idea because the Nevi'im spoke about it and so on and so forth. But let's go back to our original discussion. The Muslims at that time were not really considered a threat to the known world. But like I was saying, this king had it in for the descendants of the Mashiach, not the ancestors really, the Reish Galuta's family. So what did he do? And this is a very well documented story. This story is not legend, it's a real story. He killed every living member of King David's family. Every single one. There was one woman that was pregnant. She went into hiding and she gave birth. It was the last living descendant of King David's family. That night, the king went to sleep. And in his sleep, he was walking in a garden with huge trees, orchard, and he had an axe in his hand. One by one, he went to every single tree and started breaking it from the shorish, from the root, with the axe. Every single one, he's breaking it, till he sees a small sapling sprouting from the ground. He was about to lift the axe and rip up the sapling. Suddenly, an old man comes into the orchard with a reddish-whitish beard, grabs the king by the hand, and he said, "Not only did you come inside my orchard and break every single tree that I have over here, you also want to rip up the last sapling that I have?" And he took the axe and he hit the king on the head and he woke up from his dream. Now obviously we know that dreams are 1/60th of prophecy. Especially a king's dream. A king doesn't dream just like that. A king, lev melachim b'yad Hashem. You understand? The higher your position you are, the more connected you are. Because you're in charge, you have responsibility. Just like in this week's parasha, with the dreams, Yosef had the dreams, and next to you, you're going to see Paro had the dreams, and he wanted to know what the interpretation was. He called his Chachamim, the Persian king, to ask what's the interpretation of his dream. There was one old Jewish man over there that came up to him and told him, "You know what the interpretation of your dream is? That guy that you saw that hit you with the axe, that was King David himself. Those trees that you uprooted was all of his descendants. That last sapling that you were about to break was the last living descendant. He was warning you that if you're going to rip this last sapling, the last living member of King David's family, he will uproot you." When the king heard that, he swore. He said, "I swear that I'm going to take care of this child and make sure there will be a continuation to the descendants of King David." And that's what happened. He took this woman, she gave birth in his palace, and the child was raised, and he was known as Bustanai. This Bustanai became the next Reish Galuta. But the Sassanid regime, even though they did this last favor, even though they caused the destruction themselves, because they were fanatics. Now we know fanatics don't last long. Somebody who's a fanatic, just like in Judaism, when somebody is too religious, when he becomes too religious too fast, people call him a fanatic. He jumps 10 steps, and instead of going slowly by slowly, at one point he's going to hit something and he's going to go straight back down. So that is in the history, Rabotai. When a regime becomes too fanatic and too crazy, they get high very fast, very powerful, then they go straight into the burrows of history, just like where they came. And who are the ones who destroyed the Sassanid regime? The Muslims. the caliphates. The great Omar, the king, the caliph, the first caliph came and he killed all living Persian emperors, and he established Iraq, Babel, to be the place of the first caliph. But how did he get there? How did he become so powerful? Let's go back to Muhammad. The year is 600 CE. Muhammad is the son of a young family, merchants. Rich merchants in the city of Mecca. Now, just to give you guys a little background over here, the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, the Arabian Peninsula is a desert. The only thing they grow there is basically dates and lulavim. That's it. And today, with the gas and everything, yeah, they became one of the richest places in the world. But back then, they only used to make money 6 times a year. When the Bnei Ishmael, the Muslims, as they were known, they only had a couple of rules in their religion, because they were nomadic tribes. They didn't live in one place. They were very unsophisticated because they were all serving idols. They were pagans. While Europe was serving one God, it really was the Trinity. And Judaism, as being also one of the main religions of the world, they were like way behind. So they only had one rule. 6 times a year you have to go to Mecca. And in Mecca there is a very, very big stone over there. You guys know what it's called? The Kaaba. The Bnei Ishmael believe, the sons of Ishmael believe, that this Kaaba was brought down from heaven by the angels. So they said 6 times a year you have to come to the Mecca. You throw rocks, but you have to put your idol, each one serves a different idol, put it by the Kaaba. You make hakafot around the Kaaba. You throw stones. And this 6 times a year, the rule was nobody could fight with one another. Peace. Shalom. 6 times a year, because they were always at war with one another. The 12 tribes of Ishmael, they were always at war. Except for 6 times a year. From this 6 times a year pilgrimage, the people in the Arabian Peninsula, especially Mecca, became filthy rich. 6 times a year, like today, the Jews go to Ukraine once a year to see Rav Nachman, and the Ukrainians in Breslov become very rich because one time a year they go on Rosh Hashanah over there. Same thing over there in Mecca. The Arabs became filthy rich. Now, very interesting for the year that it happened. In the year 613, a guy gets up. His name was Muhammad. This Muhammad was an orphan. He didn't have a father. His father died when he was a young boy. And because of that, the family richness went down. So he didn't have any source of parnasah. And not only the Jews cry for parnasah, everybody cries for parnasah. So what did he do? He was a smart guy. He said, why should I work my whole life? He married a very rich widow, Almanah. He married this widow. She opened up a business for him, a date business. Basically, he would hire camels, camel drivers. They used to collect dates, and he used to sell them around, like bazaar, around the Arabian Peninsula. And he became very rich from that. He got so rich, when you get into power, you start to have thoughts of grandeur. You start to think you're, I don't know, maybe he was taking something, I don't know. Who knows? Nobody knows what happened, really. But we do know that in the year 613, he comes to Mecca during the 6-week pilgrimage, and he claimed that the Malach Gabriel came to him and said that you are God's new prophet. Like this, just like that. He comes to Mecca in front of everybody. I have something to say. What do you have to say? Moshe was the first Navi. Yoshka was the second Navi. And I am the third one. What does that mean? God told me to start a new religion. And I get to make the rules. I'm the prophet. You know what they told him? He said, how many mushrooms did you eat today? Get out of here. What are you, nuts? The Muslims told him, what are you, nuts? Get out of here. Now, as usual, there's some fanatics. He got a couple of Hasidim. And he started to make up new rules, new holidays. Now, they had a problem with it because they only had one source of parnasah. Six times a year during the 6-week pilgrimage, the people used to come and buy stuff from the people of Mecca. If they would lose this source of parnasah, they would have nothing. So they came together to drive Muhammad out of Mecca. What did Muhammad do? He waged a war. Brother against brother. Well, Muslim brother. This was known as the War of Hagira. The War of Hagira basically is the birthday of the Islam religion. That's the birthday. It's called Hagira. That was the day that Muhammad and his followers were thrown out of Mecca. They lost the war. So when he lost the war, he saw he couldn't convert any Muslims. He said, who am I going to convert? Who's the scapegoat, Rabotai? Who's the scapegoat of history? The Jews! The Jews, back then, they barely lived in the Arabian Peninsula. There were 3 families over there that numbered in the hundreds. The Bnei Kainuka, the Bnei Nadhir, and the Banu Kurizai. Those were the 3 main families in the Arabian Peninsula. They all lived in the same city. Medina. That was the city where they lived, in Medina. So, because Muhammad was a very successful merchant, he was able to come into contact with Christians and Jews alike. So when he wrote his book, he styled it after many of these religions. For example, did you guys know that the original fast day of the Muslims was not Ramadan? It was Yom Kippur.
No way.
Yes. If you guys look through history, the first Muslims kept Yom Kippur. That was their fast day. Muhammad said, you're not supposed to bow down facing Mecca, to the Kuba. You have to bow down facing what? Jerusalem. Why did he make up all these rules? He wanted to convert all the Jews of Medina, because they were filthy rich. And he needed their money to start an army. Of course, when he came to them, they told him, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, we're never going to convert. You're crazy, you're a fanatic. Why would we convert to your religion? So he started a war. But to start a war against the Jews, first he had to conquer Medina. So Muhammad started a war against all the Muslims of Medina, and he was outnumbered. 3 men to 1. He was outnumbered, he thought he was going to lose. But you know, just like they say, by some divine providence, Hashem wanted this religion to come along. Muhammad had victory after victory till he conquered the whole city of Medina. He conquered them so well, he called himself the first ruler of Islam. And he decided, first thing he was going to do, because the Jews don't want to convert, what is he going to do? He's going to kick them out. The first war he waged was against the Bnei Koinika. Now the Jews back then lived in fortresses. So he surrounded them. Nobody comes in and out. For 2 weeks they were like this, until he gave them an ultimatum. Either you convert or you leave. Exile. They said, we'd rather leave. They picked up all their stuff and they left the Arabian Peninsula. Nobody knows what happened to them. Probably they died on the way. Now these Bnei Koinika, they left a lot of gold and armory inside their fortresses. Muhammad took everything for himself. He was able to make his army twice the size. Ammunition, that's what he needed. The next war he waged was against the Bnei Nadhir. The Bnei Nadhir told him, Muhammad, listen, I don't know if you guys want to fight a war against us, we're the people of the book. Even you believe in the people of the book. We'll tell you this, we'll leave by ourselves, but we're taking our stuff with us. He said, okay, and he left. And they left. They left. But it wasn't enough. Then he went to fight against the Banu Kurizai. These were a family of pure Kohanim. This time he wasn't so nice, Muhammad. He broke into their fortresses, and on one day, it's recorded in history, 600 men were slaughtered, more than 300 children, all saying on their mouths, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. All died on Kiddush Hashem. What did he do to the woman? He didn't kill them. He sold them into slavery. Except for one girl. One girl over there was very beautiful. He took her as a wife. We know that Muhammad had a very large harem. Harem is basically, back then the kings didn't have one wife, he had like 50 wives. All the wives used to live in one house, it was called a harem. So he took this one girl for himself as a wife, her name was Rihanna. Rihanna was a very beautiful Jewish woman that he forcefully converted to Islam, and he kept to himself as basically his Jewish prize. That was his prize. Through divine providence, there's no other way to say it, Muhammad became extremely powerful. He won war after war. He conquered eventually the whole Arabian Peninsula, and he wasn't nice to the Jews wherever he went. It got to the point where he conquered most of the Morocco, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, parts of Israel, Syria. This one man, it's amazing how it happened. That's what it says in the Torah when Hashem blessed Hagar, the angel blessed Hagar. He blessed her, he said, your son is going to be what? Pere Adam. Pere Adam means a wild man. You can't really explain him. Where is his power coming from? There was a story that once he got to one of his last stops, Muhammad, it was the year 632. He killed the Jewish ruler, and he took his sister as a wife. She was a smart woman. She poisoned his food. The food didn't kill him, but it basically paralyzed him and made him choloch for the rest of his life. And he died from this poison till in the year 647. At that point, the Islam basically was the main dynasty of the world. There was only two religions back then. The Persians were totally wiped out. The Jewish people in the country of Babel were already under the rulership of the Muslims. Now, what's very important to point out as we get to the end of our shiur, that the main difference between Christianity and Islam was that Muhammad wrote in his book, the Quran, he wrote that the Jewish people should not be killed. You see, Muhammad appreciated a Jew for one thing, his monetary worth. So any place that the Jews lived under the memshelet, under the governance of Islam, they had to pay a very heavy tax. At one point, the covenant of Omar was put into place, and many rules were made, including no Jew could build a shul. You couldn't build a shul. No Jew was allowed to dress like a Muslim. No Jew was allowed to have the same hairstyle as a Muslim. No Jew was allowed to walk on the same street as the Muslim. There were rules, by the way, in Yemen, for example, the Imams of Yemen, they were Shiites. They were the descendants of Muhammad, because the Muslims split into two, the Sunnis and the Shiites. Why did they split into two? The Sunnis believed that anybody that's a Muslim, that's smart, could be the ruler. The Shiites were fanatics. They believed that anybody from the descendant of Muhammad could be the ruler of Islam, so they broke into two. It became the Caliphates and the Imams. The Imams were the descendants of Muhammad, and they were in control of Yemen. Just to show you how much they hated the Jew couldn't walk outside when it was raining. Why? Because maybe a drop of rain will hit a Jew and go into the and hit a Muslim and make him tameh. A Jew was so tameh to a Muslim, he was so tameh, that it was worse to touch a Jew than to eat a piece of pig for them. It was worse to touch a Jew, to eat a piece of pig, especially by the Shiites. The Sunnis, on the other hand, they were more considerable to the Jews. They allowed the Jews to live freely under their lands, but the Jew had to pay a very heavy tax. A very heavy tax. We were seen as inferior. Now the question is, now that we know the origins of Islam, how they started, who was Muhammad, how did his rulership start? Now we said that originally the Islamic day of forgiveness was Yom Kippur because he wanted to convert the Jews that way. Eventually, when Muhammad saw that the Jews weren't converting, he changed the laws. Yom Kippur became a voluntary fast, and instead he instituted the Ramadan. Why did he institute the Ramadan? He took the idea from the 40 days that Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Shamayim. He didn't eat those 40 days. So too, every Muslim has to fast for 40 days. He took the idea that you can't eat pig from the Jew. He had the law of shchita. They call it halal. He took the law of bowing down 5 times a day. That's their law. You got to bow down 5 times a day. That's their prayer. But he changed it. From Jerusalem, he switched it to Mecca. Why? Because Jews weren't converting. Now it's very interesting to point out that there are barely any Muslim converts. Why isn't there any Muslim converts? And I also want to connect Hanukkah in some way to this. How come Hanukkah is the, if you would describe it in one way, it's the holiday of oil. Where is most of the oil found today, Rabotai? In the Arab lands. What's the connection between the Arab lands and the oil of Hanukkah? And the truth is that the story of Hanukkah never ended. We fought against the Greeks, we fought against the Romans, but we're still living the holiday of Hanukkah. We're still living through that exile, Rabotai. And this exile has come into fruition as Islam. This Islam, blessed by an angel to be a Pere Adam, Hashem decided that this nation will be the last obstacle to the Jewish people before Mashiach comes. Why are they the last obstacle? Did you guys know, I heard this from somebody today actually, that when the bombings were happening in Israel, all the knife stabbings, a lot of Jews took upon themselves Torah and mitzvot. They were scared. You see, because sometimes we forget that we're so free. We forget that there is Hashem in this world. We forget that there is Hashem. Sometimes Hashem has to remind us. That's Islam, Rabotai. That's Islam. To remind us that a Jewish person, if he doesn't put Hashem on top of his head, then Hashem is going to put Haman on top of his head. So, this Motzei Shabbat is Hanukkah. When we light that Hanukkah candle, let's differentiate between our oil and the oil that's found in those lamps. Let's differentiate between us and them, because they differentiate themselves from us. They didn't want us to dress like them. You couldn't even have the same haircut as them. So let's not try to copy them. Let's understand who we are, what are our origins, and may we be blessed with a Freilich Chanukah, with bracha, hatzlacha, parnasa, baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.